So we'll turn our gaze today over to America. And I don't know if you know of him, you may not know of him, but there's a YouTuber called Vosh. And to be honest, he's quite good. And one of the things he's been talking about for the past couple of weeks, in fact, if you go on, there's a video just about how susceptible the US is to this pandemic and how many deaths it has the potential of causing. And not only that, but we covered Trump's response. You had Fox News, a major news network. I mean, imagine this. Imagine if someone like a news presenter, like, I don't know, the only one guy I can think of is George Galileo. Is it Galileo? I can't remember now. Yeah, imagine him coming out on the BBC, a news presenter, saying that the coronavirus is fake. Imagine that. It would be unbelievable. But that is what happened in America. Fox News went out and called it a Democratic hoax. Donald Trump even called it the same, thinking that, it will just go away in a couple of weeks. Well, guess what? It hasn't, and it's tearing through America. So, this comes from The Guardian, and it's The Missing 6 Weeks. How Trump Failed the Biggest Test of His Life. The president was aware of the danger from the coronavirus, but lack of leadership has created an emergency of epic proportions. When the definitive history of the coronavirus pandemic is written, the date 20th of January 2020 is certain it will feature prominently. For it was on this day that a 35-year-old man in Washington state, recently returned from visiting family in Wuhan, China, became the first person in the US to be diagnosed with the virus. On that very same day, 5,000 miles away in Asia, the first confirmed case of COVID-19 was reported in South Korea. The confluence was striking, but there the similarities end. In 2 months since that first fateful day, the responses to the coronavirus displayed by the US and South Korea have been complete polar opposites. One country acted swiftly and aggressively to detect and isolate the virus, and by doing so has largely contained the crisis. The other country dithered and procrastinated because it was mired in chaos and confusion and was distracted by the individual whims of its leader, and is now confronted by a health emergency of daunting proportions. Within a week of its first confirmed case, South Korea Disease Control Agency had summoned 20 private companies to the medical equivalent of a war planning summit and told them to develop a test for the virus at lightning speed. A week after that, the first diagnostic test was approved and went into battle, identifying infected individuals who could then be quarantined to halt the advance of the disease. Some of the 300,000 tests later, and the country has more or less won the war on the coronavirus. On Friday, only 91 cases were reported in a country of more than 50 million. The US response tells a far different story. 2 days after the first diagnosis in Washington state, Donald Trump went on air on CNBC and bragged that we have it totally under control. It's one person coming from China. It's just going to be fine. However, a week after that, the Wall Street Journal published an opinion article by two former top health political officials within the Trump administration under the headline, Act Now to Prevent an American Epidemic. Lucia Borrow and Scott Gilleb laid out a menu of what had to be done instantly to avert a massive health disaster. Top of their list was to work with private industry to develop an easy-to-use rapid diagnostic kit. In other words, just what South Korea was doing. It was not until the 29th of February, more than a month after the journal article and almost 6 weeks after the first case of the coronavirus was confirmed in the country, that the Trump administration put that advice into practice. Laboratories and hospitals would finally be allowed to conduct their own COVID-19 test to speed up the process. Those missing 4 to 6 weeks are likely to go down in the definitive history as a cautionary tale of the political devastating consequences of failed political leadership. Today, 86,000 cases have been confirmed across the US, pushing the nation to the top of the world's coronavirus league table, even above China. More than a quarter of those cases are in New York City, now a global center of the coronavirus pandemic, with New Orleans also raising alarm. Nationally, 1,300 people have died. Most worryingly, the curve of cases continues to rise precipitously, now, with no sign of the plateau that has spared South Korea. The US response will be studied for generations as a textbook example of disastrous failed effort. Ron Callan, who spearheaded the fight against Ebola in 2014, told the Georgetown University panel recently, "What happened in Washington has been a fiasco of incredible proportions." Jeremy Klondike, who led the US government's response to international disasters at USAID from 2013 to 2017, frames the past 6 weeks as striking, in strikingly similar terms. He told The Guardian, "We are witnessing in the United States for one of the greatest failures of basic governance and basic leadership in modern times." In Kodak's analysis, the White House had all the information it needed to act by the end of January, and to act decisively. Instead, Trump repeatedly played down the severity of the threat, blaming China for what he called the Chinese virus, and insinuating falsely that his partial travel bans on China and Europe would take all it would take to contain the crisis. If Trump's travel ban did nothing else, it stayed off some degree to avert the virus in the US and buying a little time, which makes a lack of decisive action all the more curious. "We didn't use that time optimally, especially for the case of testing," said William Schnaffler, an infectious diseases specialist at Villavant University Medical Center. "We've been playing reluctant catch-up throughout. As Schaefer sees it, the stuttling provision of mass testing put us behind the 8 ball right at the start. It didn't even permit us to define the extent of the virus in this country. Through all the decision to allow private and state labs to provide testing has increased the flow of test kits, the US remains starkly behind South Korea, which conduct more than 5 times as many tests per capita, and that makes predicting where the next hotspot will pop up after New York and New Orleans almost impossible." In the absence of sufficient test kits, the US Center for Disease Control and Prevention, the CDC, initially kept a tight rein on testing, creating a bottleneck. I believe the CDC was caught flat-footed, and was how the governor of New York, Andrew Cuomo, put it on March 7th, "They're slowing down the state." The CDC's botched rollout of testing was the first indication that the Trump administration was faltering as the health emergency gathered pace. Behind the scenes, deep flaws in the way federal agencies had come to operate under Trump were being exposed. In 2018, the pandemic unit hit the National Security Council, which was tasked to prepare for a health emergency precisely like the current one. It was disbanded, eliminating the office that's contributed to the federal government's sluggish domestic response. Beth Cameron, a senior director of the office at the time, said at the time it was broken up, wrote in the Washington Post. Disbanding the unit exasperated the threat and was already prevalent 2 years prevailed 2 years after of Trump. An exodus of skilled and experienced officers who knew what they were doing. There's already been an erosion of the expertise of competent leadership at important levels of government, a former senior official told The Guardian. Over that time, there was a lot of paranoia and people left that they had a hard time trying to attract good replacements, the official said. Nobody wanted to work there. It was hardly a morale-boosting gesture when Trump proposed a 16% cut in the CDC funding on the 10th of February, 11 days after the World Health Organization had declared it a public emergency over COVID-19. Schaefer, who described himself as the president of the CDC fan club, said he had been saddened by how sidelined the CDC had been over the past 2 months. Here we have the public health issue of our era, and no one doesn't hear from the CDC, the premier health organization in the world, Schaefer said. The Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, which regulates diagnostic tests, will control any new treatments for the coronavirus and has also shown vulnerabilities. The agency recently indicated that it was looking to possibly prescribing the malaria drug chloroquine for the coronavirus sufferers, even though there is no evidence it would work, and in some indications it would have serious side effects. The decision dismayed experts, given that Trump has personally pushed the unproven remedy on a whim. It smacked as a wave of anti-science sentiment sweeping federal agencies under this presidency. As the former senior official put it, we have the FDA bowing to political pressure and making decisions completely counter to modern science. The highly respected civil servants with impeccable scientific credentials have all struggled to get out on the front of the president, and Dr. Andy Fauci, an infectious disease expert who has become a rare trusted face in the administration amid the coronavirus surge, has expressed his frustration. This week, Fauci was asked by Science magazine writer Joan Cohen how he could stand beside Trump at a daily press briefings and listen to him misleading the American people with comments such as that the travel ban had been a great success in blocking the virus to this country. Fauci replied, "I don't know, but what do you want me to do? I mean, seriously, John, let's get real. What do you want me to do?" Trump has designated himself as a wartime president, but if the title bears any validity, his military tactics have been highly uncontroversial. He has battered the problems encountered by federal agencies and playing musical chairs at the top of the coronavirus force. The president began by creating on the 29th of January a special coronavirus task force. He gave then Vice President Mike Pence the job, who promptly appointed Deborah Birx, the coronavirus response coordinator. Before the Federal Emergency Area Agency FEMA began taking charge of key areas, with Jared Kushner, the president's son-in-law, creating a shadow team that increasingly appears to be calling the shots. There is no point of responsibility, the former senior official told The Guardian. It keeps shifting. Nobody owns the problem. And, of course, this is what fascist governments do. Someone has to pass the blame. And eventually, it won't be any of those people. It won't be Trump. It won't be Pence. It won't be Deborah. It won't be Jared Kushner. But there you go. Amid the confusion of day-to-day management of the crisis, and it has frequently come directly from Trump himself via his Twitter feed, the president, with more than a half an eye on the New York Stock Exchange, has constantly talked down the scale of the crisis. On the 30th of January, as the World Health Organization was declaring a global emergency, Trump said, we only have 5 people. Hopefully, everything's going to be great." On the 24th of February, Trump claimed the coronavirus is very much under control in the USA. The next day, Nancy Melischner, the CDC's top official on respiratory diseases, told the radically different approach to telling the truth, warning the American people the disruption of everyday life might be severe. Trump was reportedly so angered by the comment and its impact on share prices that he shouted down the phone at Michener's boss, the Secretary of Health and Human Services, Alex Azar. Michener was 100% right. She gave a totally honest and accurate assessment, Conduct told The Guardian, and for that, Trump angrily rebuked her department. That sent a very clear message about what is and what isn't permissible to say. Conduct recalled attending a meeting with Trump in mid-February with top Trump administration officials present, in which the only topic of conversation was the travel bans. That was where he began to despair about the federal handling of the crisis. "I thought, holy Jesus, where's the discussion on protecting our hospitals? Where's the discussion of high-risk populations on surveillance so that we can detect where the virus is? I know that the president has set the priority. The bureaucracy was following it, but it was the wrong priority. So it has transpired. In the wake of a testing disaster has come the personal protective equipment disaster, or the PPE disaster, the hospital bed disaster, and now the ventilator disaster. Ventilators, literal life preservers, are in dire short supply across the country. When governors are begging Trump to unleash the full might of the US government on its critical problem, he gave this answer on the 16th of March. In a phrase that will stand beside the 20th of January as 2020, as one of the most relatively moments of history of coronavirus. He said, respirators, ventilators, all the equipment, try getting it yourselves. To date, the Trump administration has supplied 400 ventilators to New York City. Cuomo's estimation, 30,000 are needed. You want a pat on the back for sending 400 ventilators? Cuomo asked on Tuesday. You pick the 26,000 who are going to die because you only sent 400 ventilators. In the absence of strong federal response, a patchwork of efforts has sprouted all across the country. State governors are doing their own thing. Cities' individual hospitals are coping as best they can. In the improvised attempt to address such inconsistencies, charitable startups have proliferated on social media. Kondak has come together with fellow disaster relief experts to set up the COVID Local, an online quick and dirty guide how to fight a pandemic. We are seeing an emergence of a 50-state anarchy because of a total vacuum of federal leadership. It's absurd that think tanks and Twitter are providing more actionable guidance in the US than the federal government, but that's where we are. Valerie Griffith is a founding member of another of the new online startups that are trying to fill the Trump void. So he set up an emergency department for doctors across the country. GetUSPPP.org, and it's set to counter the top-down chaos that is putting frontline health workers like herself in danger through death of protective gear. Girth is an emergency and critical care physician in Portland, Oregon. She spends most of her days now in intensive care treating precariously ill patients with coronavirus. Her hospital is relatively well supplied, she said, but even so, protective masks will run out within 2 weeks. We're all worried about it. We are scared for our own health, for our health of our families and of our patients. Early on in the crisis, Gethin said that it dawned on her and of many of her peers that the federal government, which they would normally look to keep them safe, was nowhere to be seen. They resigned themselves to a terrible new reality. We said it ourselves, though we are going to have to expose ourselves to get the virus. When the federal government isn't going to be there to provide adequate supplies, it's just a matter of time. But just in the last few days, Griffiths has started to see the emergence of something else. She has witnessed the explosion of Americans doing it for themselves, filling in the holes led by Trump's failed leadership. People are stepping up all around us, she said. I'm amazed by what has happened in such a short time. It gives me hope. So you remember a couple of weeks ago where we said like the Trump presidency is over because of this crisis? I think they have a very fair point. A lot of people downplayed it, but no, I think there's every chance that after it's over, Trump gets an absolute roasting and absolutely gets slaughtered at the election. I think it's a very real possibility.